journey to the passage of the 2022 Electoral Act has been nerve-wracking, fraught with tension, filled with intrigue, polarizing and intensely observed by both state and non-state actors. It's an endeavor many will not forget in a hurry.
Therefore, vote yes to electronic transmission of results, because that is what Nigerians want.
I vote no, just to allow INEC to do the best job for Nigeria. Thank you.
Since return to democracy, Nigeria has had elections, and these elections have produced leaders. But then these elections have had their own downsides and dark sides. Year in, year out, when elections are conducted, they've either been marred by all forms of irregularity, manifesting or signposted with things like ballot box snatching, things like results falsification, electoral violence, in fact, a very weak and compromised electoral commission. Over the years, we've seen our elections shaped by a compromised INEC with a compromised leadership, and then we've also seen, a voter register that lacks credibility.
Looking at our democratic experiment from 1999, you will see that as at the time that the civilians took over government in 1999, the priority then, when the then General Abubakar had conducted the elections that brought President Olusegun Obasanjo to power, the priority then was to have the military leave the stage of governance and return back to the barracks. That was the priority in 1999. And so in 1999, we had challenges, various kinds of challenges in the election. But if you notice then, there was no, nobody raised any alarm. Nobody even asked any questions. Nobody, there was no accountability. There was no effort to review the elections that took place then and to find out what actually happened, because the good people of this country were just interested in seeing the military leave the governance arena and go back to where they belong, that is the barracks.
The elections we used to have, if you take back as far back as 2003, 2007, that was when I could say that our electoral process was fundamentally flawed, in the sense that you could not guarantee that the votes of the voters would actually count. There was nothing to indicate that people were following due process when it came to election administration.
We saw a situation in which people were going to vote, and the results of where they are voting will be announced. We saw the reign of thugs. We saw do or die. We saw a situation in which the judiciary became, the people just acted in a way that makes it look like if you don't like what we have done, you can go to court. And so the vote of the people didn't matter anymore. The judiciary were not the one deciding who governs or who doesn't govern.
What was very sad, all through our journey of elections, was that the cost of elections was increasing by every election cycle, but the quality of the election was declining, and then the turnout for elections was getting lower by every electoral cycle. So there were just contradictions. You're spending more for elections, but people are not showing up.
Many Nigerians have yearned for a reform of the country's electoral laws, hoping that it will sanitize and provoke confidence in the electoral system.
Since the return of democracy in 1999, after the election in 1999, Nigerians, and particularly civil society organizations, Transition Monitoring Group in particular, have noted certain fundamental provisions that must be amended if we are going to have free, fair, and credible election, and if we are going to encourage Nigerians to participate in the election in Nigeria.
You had an electoral commission whose title is the Independent National Electoral Commission. It was only independent in its name, but in practice, it wasn't independent. And so the financial independence of INEC was not guaranteed. And you know, one of the tools used in the playbook to rig elections is stifling access to funding for the Electoral Commission. And so there was need for INEC to be, INEC's funding to be derived from the consolidated fund. And that necessitated, you know, the amendments to the Constitution to put INEC on the first line charge based on the recommendations of Justice Waite's Committee on Electoral Reform.
As an electoral management body, after every election, the Commission does what we call both internal review and external review of the processes of election. Then we also did external review. We spoke with the different political parties, we engaged civil society groups and organizations, we engaged the media, and we also engaged international observers and even other multilateral institutions. And we came to the conclusion that based on our own experiences as an electoral management body, and also based on the recommendations made by domestic election observers, made by the international observers, that the need had come, or that the time had come for us to take a critical look at the electoral legal framework and make it more robust, make it more inclusive, and also make it in such a way that everybody will have faith in it.
With every election, there is always a new development. And of course, when you talk about democratic practices, it's only enabled through effective legal framework. So at every election, there's an opportunity to have a review of the process and to have recommendations that would enhance the electoral system.
At the inception of the 9th Assembly in 2019, the Senate and House of Representatives promised to amend the country's electoral laws. The 8th Assembly, led by Senate President Bukola Saraki and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Honorable Yakubu Dogara, had amended the Electoral Act before the 2019 general elections. But President Buhari declined assent to the Electoral Amendment Bill on the basis that passing a new electoral bill far into the electoral process for the 2019 general elections, which commenced under the 2015 Electoral Act, could create some uncertainty about the applicable legislation to govern the process. The 9th Assembly picked up that baton, and the Senate and House of Representatives committees on INEC began working on the legislation requesting input from the public.
The Electoral Act it doesn't just govern elections alone or political parties, it also governs the media. It's specific about what the media should do during elections, during campaigns, and in fact, in some instances, provides the penalties that the media will pay should they violate those provisions.
So before the deployment of the BVAS, INEC started deploying the smart card reader in 2015. I remember there was a test of smart card readers across the country before the deployment in that elections. Now, the smart card reader was introduced to reduce multiple voting. It was introduced to ensure accreditation of voters with technology. However, the smart card reader was not an introduction of a legislation. It was a policy from the Electoral Commission. So in previous elections, we've seen cases in court where individuals wanted to rely on the data for the smart card reader. And the Supreme Court at the time basically said, when it comes to the hierarchy of laws, the policies or rather the legislation supersedes the law. So unless the law acknowledges and recognizes the smart card reader, what would always be upheld is what the law provides for. And at the time, when it comes to accreditation, the only reliance to determine accurate numbers of voters was the voter register, meaning that any data in the smart card reader that showed a different number of accredited voters could not stand beside the smart card reader. So what happened was, at polling units, while INEC had said the smart card reader will be deployed across board, we had polling units where some officials would just intentionally refuse to use the smart card reader to accredit voters. So you had a breach across different parts of the country where smart card readers were not deployed in 2015. In 2019, our data showed that in 7% of polling units, the smart card reader were present, but they were just not used. And we realized that because people understood that if you go to court to challenge an election for the lack of usage of the smart card reader for accreditation, you would not win in court, because at the end, if the Supreme Court had given an advisory that for this to be recognized, you need to put it in the law, it would mean that politicians would look for ways to ensure you don't use that.
We also felt that society is moving and that the commission needed to introduce technology in the electoral process to obviate pernicious human interference in the electoral process. We had introduced some of these reforms, but some of the reforms were not backed by law. So we went to the National Assembly and insisted that the time has come when the technological innovations that the Commission was introducing must be backed by law.
First of all, I've been in politics since 1982. And I've gone through this process of election, not me by persuading, but through candidates that our party sponsored. And I've seen the lapses virtually during every election. And when I was appointed as chairman Senate Committee on INEC, I said there are 3 issues which I have to tackle. First, number 1 is the issue of Electoral Act. We have to amend it, and Nigerians could have free, fair, and credible elections.
Sometime in 2018 and 2019, we already had sat down and began to look at the various gaps within the Electoral Act and where we needed to call for an amendment. And we started working on put together some proposed amendments to the Electoral Act, and in preparation for when we have the right opportunity. And before then, we started engaging with some members of the National Assembly who were closely responsible to begin to present our issues before them. And I remember clearly during the repealing of the Act, we had the opportunity to also make our presentation at the National Assembly. I was there to, of course, call on the various sections that we wanted to see some form of amendments that specifically speaks to mandating the independent National Electoral Commission, mandating them on the various provisions for persons with disabilities, and looking at area around priority queuing for persons with disabilities. And also there's the section 9 that speaks to the continuous voter registration, because we wanted to see INEC capturing disaggregated data of persons with disabilities.
The beauty of the 2022 amendment is in some of the sunshine issues that we brought. First is the fact that the electoral management body needs to have its finances 1 year to the election. The whole idea of that is to ensure that vendor issues are resolved. And if vendor issues are resolved on time, it is likely that it is going to show a punctuality index.
Prior to the Electoral Act 2022, the High Courts of the various states handle pre-election matters. The High Court of the Federal Capital Territory handles pre-election matters, and the Federal High Courts handle pre-election matters. So we found that we were deluged with pre-election matters from all over the places. Some people will go to a small division of a state high court and file a matter without the commission even knowing. So we felt that we needed a centralized system of handling pre-election matters. And that was why we insisted that the National Assembly must remove jurisdiction from the state high courts and the High Court of the Federal Capital Territory and domicile same with only the Federal High Court, for us to have some level of certainty in terms of pre-election matters.
Well, I think it's important we know that we can't keep doing the same thing the same way and expect a different outcome.
For us at Yiaga Africa, we worked closely with the EU SDGM partners under the Fixed Elections Initiative. And the Fixed Elections Initiative was supported by the European Union delegation. And what we did was 3 things. One was to build consensus in the public and with different stakeholders on the agenda for reforms. And that We hosted several citizens' town hall meetings, quite remarkable, to set the agenda, to give citizens an opportunity to set the priorities for electoral reform, but also create an opportunity where legislators and citizens can engage. And so those town hall meetings hosted during COVID and post-COVID were very unique. And that's something that civil society, about Yiaga Africa, did contribute to. I think the second was also fostering collective action. The fact that you had civil society groups working together, and I say this, that collective action delivered the 2022 Electoral Act, because every stakeholder was working, they deployed individual resources at different times to get us to where we are. And so not one organization or one individual can take credit for the 2022 Electoral Act. We must commend people like Clement Wankwo, who was also part of the technical committee, and also commend the likes of Festus Okoye, but also the chairman, Kabir Geya, and the chair of the Senate committee, and you know, the chair of the House committee, Honorable Aisha Duku. Because these individuals played roles that were actually unseen. They ensured that, you know, the issues that we as citizens from the outside were campaigning and advocating, they ensured that some of those issues made it to the final report.
A number of the civil society organizations under Situation Room and others played a great role. What makes us rich as the Nigerian Civil Society Situation Room is the individual organizations that are part of the Situation Room. Some of them engage with you know, the policymakers directly, with the parliamentarians. Others are engaging in different sectors. Others are engaging in educating, engaging with several committees across board. And I can say that a number of them, including, you know, ActionAid, played a great role.
On July 15, 2021, the Senate and the House of Representatives scheduled the Electoral Act bill in both chambers for passage. Days before the passage, there were widespread reports of plans by federal legislators to expunge a clause from the bill which guaranteed electronic transmission of results, which is an important component of the bill.
In the lead up to 2022, when the Electoral Act was signed, you know that what do you call it? The Senate had already even taken a position to even take the Electoral Act backwards, adding a clause that made INEC subject to the Communications Commission in terms of using electronic transmission of results.
The Commission may transmit results.
The Senate amended Clause 52, which gives INEC the discretion to introduce electronic voting as may be practicable. This amendment caused tension in the Senate chamber after intense condemnation by opposition lawmakers, and for the first time in the 9th Assembly, a division was called. But the majority voted to amend Clause 52 by empowering the Nigerian Communication Commission (NCC) to determine the use of electronic means to transmit election results.
And I think it really shocked me when provisions like electronic transmission were removed from the report. But you know, the biggest shocker was after it made it back into the report and the draft bill was presented and the debates began. The way some senators voted against electronic transmission of results was shocking.
The House of Representatives was not spared in the drama over the same Clause 52. Although the House of Representatives chose to allow electoral umpire, INEC, to determine the best means to transmit electoral results, it however invited the heads of INEC and NCC to appear before it and throw more light on the contentious issue and guide the House on its resolution.
It's only 3G that could give that kind of cover, that could give that kind of transmission.
On October 12, 2021, the Senate reversed its earlier stance on electronic voting and gave electoral umpire, INEC, free rein to determine the procedure for transmitting election results.
In line with norms and traditions of the Senate.
The waiting game for President Buhari to sign the electoral bill began after the National Assembly transmitted the bill to him on 19th November 2021.
Another point, was when it looked like, as it happened in 2018, the president was not going to sign. People were not quite sure, that he will sign.
We at civil society did contribute to the reform process. Not to also mention, the final protest, that helped put pressure on the president to assent, to the electoral bill because of the implication that a delay in assenting to the bill had for the timetable and schedule of activities introduced by INEC, because the new provision was that INEC should issue notice of election 360 days. And the president didn't assent to the bill until 25th of February 2022 at 12:25 p.m. That was when he assented to the bill. And when civil society protested and urged the president to sign the bill, by February 22nd, 2022, that demand was based on the fact that we wanted to protect INEC, we wanted to protect against the shift in date. But the president didn't hearken to the call of citizens and civil society, and he scheduled the signing on the 25th. And when immediately it was mentioned that he was going to sign the act on the 25th, we told the Nigerian people that INEC would have to shift the date of the elections. And true to fact, 24 hours after the president assented to the bill, INEC had to withdraw the initial timetable that it had published and then issued a new timetable. But as citizens and civil society, we were vindicated, by that action.
Good election, good democracy. Good election, good democracy.
I think the high point was the level of citizens' interest in the electoral reform. And that's because I've been engaging in electoral reform before this last process. But this time around, we saw citizens engaging, sending messages, calling. One day, the Senate President, Ahmed Lawal, made a statement in the chambers. It was on media, and he said, "Stop calling me. I have one vote. Call your lawmakers."
When the report of the committee was mutilated, it was just unbelievable that they had deleted electronic transmission. They had also removed the provision that gives INEC the power to review declarations made under duress. But it was very disturbing. And when we went to the Nigerian public and really condemned this action and called on the National Assembly, I was very worried that there was some interest in the National Assembly that didn't want the act passed because the 2023 election was in sight.
The House will reintroduce the amendment tomorrow, and we will work quickly to address the mitigating concerns, pass the bill, and send it back to His Excellency President Muhammad Buhari for assent. This is a matter of concern, as it appears the version sent to the President differs from what is circulating in the public domain.
On 21st December 2021, President Buhari wrote to the National Assembly declining assent to the electoral bill, citing the cost of conducting direct primary elections, security challenges, and possible manipulation of electoral processes by political players as part of the reasons for his decision.
I think the high point became when the president, after the 6th time the bill went to the president, he made a promise that he was going to sign the bill if it was adjusted. And then it was adjusted. And for the 7th time, it went to the president. And there was a lot of tension for whether the president was going to sign it or not sign it, the issue of consensus, the issue of the clauses that were coming in. That was tension-packed for me.
The Senate and House of Representatives re-amended the bill and harmonized their versions of Clause 84 to include direct, indirect, and consensus primary methods of electing candidates.
So a lot of combination of efforts, were put together invisibly and visibly to get what we got. Like I said, the anti-electoral transparency element, both within the legislature and outside the legislature, were heavily controlling what was going on in the National Assembly.
On February 25, 2022, President Muhammadu Buhari finally signed the Electoral Act Amendment Bill into law.
Despite all the odds, the president signed the bill, and I say congratulations to him, because where one is bold enough to take such steps, you need to say congratulations. And so that was the tension part, one tension day for me, and once it was signed, it was like, oh yes.
Inclusion of our rights, the repeal of INEC may reasonably accommodate us to the replacement of INEC shall, which gives impetus to our demands and also further give INEC the legal mandate to ensure inclusion in the electoral process. Those to me were issues around the entire process that will remain indelible in my memory.
With the confidence that Nigerians have in the 2022 Electoral Act, that it will yield to high turnout for elections. And we hope that we would record 50 to 60% turnout for the general elections. That would be a remarkable feat, and it will be a true test of the faith that citizens have in the Electoral Act 2022. But you can have the best of the laws in place. If the attitude of the politician does not change, they will continue to devise means to subvert and undermine the law, because they always want to win elections and they never think that losing election is part of the electoral process.